Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support on GunGuyTV. All right, now, here's your warning. I do this periodically, so I am a Christian, and I don't hide it under a bowl. I do talk about Christianity, and I get in the Bible every once in a while on my channel. So if you're new to the channel and you don't realize that, I wanted to make sure that you knew that now. This is your opportunity, if you're not interested in any of that, to go ahead and watch something else, and you can stop the video now. If you'd like to continue watching, then we're going to talk a little bit about the rioting that's going on, the issue surrounding the tragic death of George Floyd briefly, and we're going to get in the Bible a bit and talk about racism and the fact that it has no place in Christianity. So we'll talk about that for Sunday morning. So as I said, now's your chance. You can turn it off if you don't want to talk about that. This morning, Sunday mornings, because of COVID-19, we have a Bible group we get together with every week, and we moved it to Sunday mornings because it was more convenient for some friends we have who are in England. So this morning we had our little Bible group before we had our church through through Zoom, which because we can't meet, and we've been doing that as well. So we had our church service after that. And during the Bible group, just to give you an idea of who was in our Bible group, so you can have a little behind-the-scenes thing into the Persinger house here before I get into this. We talked about this and some other things this morning. In our Bible group are my wife and I. I'm just a pasty-faced white guy. I'm Italian and German by descent, and my wife is Mexican and Spanish by descent. And then we had also Jim and Laura. Laura is a Japanese lady, and Jim is Italian and Irish, I think. Crazy mix there, huh? And then you've got Jose, who obviously, with a name like Jose, I think Jose grew up in Tijuana, and he obviously is of Mexican descent, an older gentleman. He's retired. And like Jose, my wife and I speak Spanish. And then we had Steve and Agatha, who've been friends of ours for a long, long time, and they are in England because they're actually from England, and they immigrated here legally, and then they had to go back because they have to go through a crazy process with immigration. But they are Black British, and their daughter, youngest daughter of the two, has been living with us for a year and change because she wanted to finish school here, and of course she's Black, and so she lives with us. And then we've got my son, who's from a previous relationship of mine, and he is Filipino, half Filipino, Bisayan and Ilocano, in case you're Filipino and you want to know the parts of the Philippines that his mother was from. She was Bisayan and Ilocano. And then, you know, I don't talk about my daughter, but my daughter obviously is part Mexican and Spanish. So it's kind of a mixed bag household. And our church is like that. It's very ethnically mixed. There's a whole bunch of different languages. It's not any one group. So you won't walk in there and find mostly white people or black people or Asian people or Latino people. It's sort of evenly divided amongst a bunch. And I, as a result, having grown up here and in that environment, grown up in the San Diego area, I can't remember ever viewing people personally differently depending on the size and shape of they are, the color they are, or whatever, because I wasn't taught that as a kid, and I grew up here where that wasn't as prevalent as it is in some parts of the country. And then in our household and in our church, it's a very ethnically mixed church, and my best friend in the church is a Border Patrol agent named Ron, and he's black as black could be, and we're super good friends with he and Kashmiri and their daughters and so on. So we don't think that way, but that is not to deny that racism is a big problem, and so I'm not in any way denying that it is a problem. I'm just saying that within our household and within the area where we live, it really isn't as much. Now, parts of San Diego it probably is. But we don't see it that way. So for us, we had a discussion after our little Bible talk in church this morning in the household about that. We wanted to make sure that everybody was comfortable and that we talked it through, and we did. I bring this up with you for a few reasons. One is I've talked to a lot of my law enforcement friends over the last week and had some time with a very good friend of mine who's a retired police chief. And I have yet to find one of them who is not completely and utterly appalled by what happened to George Floyd. I've watched the video and I'm appalled by it. And so I'm grateful that people protested when they did, and I'm separating here. I'm separating protest from looting and rioting. They're two different things. I'm grateful that people protested when they did, because otherwise, it seemed to me that that police department in Minneapolis was circling the wagons around these officers, and they shouldn't have been, because those officers need to be prosecuted. Or, one is being prosecuted. The others, I think, are being investigated, because what happened to that gentleman was so wrong it defies description and should never have occurred. And then I think there needs to be some investigation into that department to figure out where that mindset came from. Is that a department-wide thing, or is that just with that particular officer and the officers that were with him? I don't know. But I'm content now to let the investigation continue and to let the prosecution continue and determine what's right and what's wrong, and what crimes these men should be accused of and tried for, and I think more than likely convicted of. And I'm sure there are these same problems across the country. Again, in my life, I haven't experienced them because I'm a pasty-faced white guy, and I don't think that way, so I haven't done that to people, and I'm not aware of it as much because of that, even with the friends I have who happen to be a racially or ethnically mixed group. In fact, I've always taught my students that there's only one race. It's the human race, and we come in different sizes, shapes, and colors, and we make our rice differently, and we make our food differently, and we have different beliefs, and we have different cultural backgrounds and so on. But that's the diversity of God right there, and something we should be celebrating. The fact that God is that creative and that people are that diverse is a great thing, particularly when it comes to eating. I am half Italian, I love to eat. So this is something we should be celebrating and enjoying, not using as a tool to divide. And that's one of the things I wanted to share with you from the Bible today. There are a couple of examples of areas in which we learn from Jesus and from the Bible that this kind of stuff is not biblical. It is not the teaching of the Lord, and it should not be. And so if you want to, and you're interested in looking in the Bible, I'm going to be looking in Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25, looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan. And you may have heard of the Good Samaritan, or just the term. And if you've heard of a Good Samaritan, this is what this is, so that you know in those times, Samaritans were a group of people who were looked down upon by the Jews. They were considered to be second-class citizens. They were essentially I guess you would call them a racial minority, even though I think the term race is misapplied, because there's the human race. But nevertheless, you could look at them that way, as a racial minority who were mistreated and thought to be worthless, essentially, by the Jews. But the person who was good in this story was actually the Samaritan, the person who was most looked down upon. So let me read the story to you real quick. So we'll start in verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus, and he said, "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to enter eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." So he's quoting Deuteronomy there, and a couple of other places as well. Jesus replied, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But this gentleman wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" He's trying to trick Jesus into a stupid answer, I suppose. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side." This is a priest, it's a religious leader of the time, a Jewish religious leader, walking down the road, sees this guy beaten and robbed, crosses the street, and walks down the other side of the road. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw the man, passed by on the other side. So again, a Levite, who is a religious leader, Jewish religious leader, again passed by on the other side of the street. But a Samaritan, these are the people who are looked down upon, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, poured on oil and wine, and then put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Jesus asked a very good question. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." We learn from that story because, in many ways, because he was trying to teach the Jews, you look upon the Samaritans as if they're lesser human beings, and they're not. You yourselves, in your pride and arrogance, do stupid things, and you treat people poorly. And here in this parable, it was you who talk about your holiness and your piousness and your righteousness. You cross the street and you ignore the downtrodden. But the Samaritan, the very person that you treat poorly, stopped and helped. This is a terrific lesson. It teaches us that we should not look down on others. We must not look down on others. If you grab your Bible and turn it over to Galatians chapter 3, you learn that God does not view his people that way. In fact, he says in verse 28, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." So I want to remind you, particularly if you're a person of faith, there is no black, no white, no Asian, no Latino in God's eyes. There is no tall or short or fat or thin. There is no pretty or ugly. There is no smart or dumb. There is none of that in God's eyes. God sees us each as unique individuals whom he created, and he loves us all. We must look upon each other as Galatians teaches. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. In my lifetime, I've had many neighbors, and some were different sizes, shapes, and colors, and from different ethnic backgrounds and spoke different languages. It's my calling as a Christian to love them all and to show Christ to other people. Now, you say, well, that's fine for you to stand there and say that, Joel. You live in a nice neighborhood, and there's not a lot of crime, and you're not abused, and so on. And you'd be right. And I can't dispute any of that. We do live in a nice neighborhood, and we don't have much crime, and we're not mistreated. At the same time, we had a serious protest last night and yesterday in a little town called La Mesa, California. That's not terribly far from the town that we live in. And they burnt down 2 bank buildings, and they threw rocks and that kind of stuff at the police department. And they injured some people, and they looted the store, and looted quite a few stores. I know they looted the Vons, and they were doing that for quite a while. And what does my son, the great big half Filipino guy, along with some of the young single brothers from our church, what do they do this morning? Early this morning, while my wife and I are setting up our Zoom Bible talk group so that we could talk about this and other stuff, my son gets up and says, "Dad, I'm going to go with some of the brothers. We're going to go over to La Mesa and help clean up." That's bringing people together, not tearing them apart. All this rioting and destruction and violence is doing is dividing us. It's not bringing us together, and it has to stop. If you watch the news, all you will see is burning, violence, hatred. You'll see people beaten. Last night, I watched a video on social media of a store owner who was attacked by a mob and beaten to death. I don't know whether he lived or died. You may have seen the video, but this young person's body lay in a heap on the ground after he was stomped on, kicked, and beaten, at least unconscious and broken. His broken body lay in a heap with his legs and arms akimbo, and he looked like a complete mess. And I thought to myself, my God in heaven. In fact, I typed this on Twitter, my God in heaven, what kind of evil people do such things? That sort of stuff divides us. It does not seek justice for George Floyd. Justice for George Floyd is going to happen in Minneapolis with those 4 officers who were responsible for his death, and for the department, the police department there, who wanted to circle the wagons around the cop that had his knee on his neck. Justice for George Floyd is going to happen when police departments across the country reevaluate their policies and make sure that their training and policy does not allow for that kind of misbehavior and that kind of damage to people that are, I mean, this is a misbehavior under the cover of authority, and that cannot be allowed. That's where justice for George Floyd is going to happen. It's not going to happen in streets across the country where destruction happens everywhere, and business owners who have absolutely nothing to do with what happened to George Floyd lose their businesses, lose their livelihoods. For crying out loud, they haven't been able to open for almost 3 months, and now they can't open at all because their businesses have been torched or destroyed. That's not justice. So I'm not talking to you about racism because I've never experienced it. I can't relate to that, and I'm not going to pretend that I can. But I've seen a lot of violence, and I can tell you it does not resolve these things. What resolves these things is when people come together like they are this morning in various parts of the country, and not that far from where we live with my son and his friends, who, by the way, are an ethnically mixed group of young men, bringing brooms and trash bags and helping clean up the damage that was caused last night. That's what unifies. Over and over in the Bible, Jesus calls us, and the apostles called us, and God calls us to have a unity of the Spirit, to be united with one another, to come together, not apart. And as Christians, sometimes we do. We do separate. You have black churches and Latino churches, Mexican churches, Latin churches, whatever you want to call them. You have Asian churches and so on. I've never liked that personally because I think we're all human beings and we should come together, and our diversity in our color and size and culture should be something that we should applaud and enjoy, not separate ourselves. My church doesn't do that. Others do. I don't stand in criticism of them. I just think whenever we divide, we're helping the opposition here, and the devil divides. That's why he's a divider. That's what he is. You divide and conquer. This is not a time for us to divide as Americans, and as Christians, most certainly, it's not a time for us to divide. It's a time for us to come together. So one of the things that Steve asked in his lesson this morning in our Bible talk is, how are you known by others? How do other people see you? I want people to see me as somebody who unites, not divides. My son today is being seen as a man who shows up after the division and the destruction and helps clean up the mess and restore peace and unite. I urge you at this point to do the same. Whatever you may think of what happened with George Floyd, whatever you may think of all this other stuff, look, let's get back to what Americans know. And that is that we're all Americans and that we get to treat each other with respect, every last one of us. It doesn't matter the color of your skin or the language you speak or what culture you come from or how you make your rice. We all bleed red. You know, I meet very few veterans who are bigoted, by the way, because they've served with their brothers and sisters in harm's way, and they've seen each other bleed. Maybe we should start taking that same approach to this and understand that we're all human. There's one race. It's called the human race. And we should treat each other with respect. Well, that's all I've got today. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I really do appreciate it. And if you can help out, then that would be awesome. Now, the one thing I'm going to leave you with here, and I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to present them. I'm going to leave you with some images that you won't see on the news, because these images are of people taking care of one another and coming together. I think it's important that we see them during this time, that we see people in these damaged places that look like war zones now, coming together and focus on that more on what the news wants us to see, which is the destruction and the violence. The news is counterproductive. If it bleeds, it leads. But they don't show you the things that bring people together. They don't show you the good part of humanity. So I'm going to do that here, and I'll just leave you with that. Wherever you go, whatever you do, please be safe.